we do? First of all, what did we do last week? What did we fulfill again?
The manifest destiny.
Exactly, and that led to what? That's the next
Chaos.
No, that was we fulfilled manifest destiny.
Yeah.
But we're moving past that now. So now we have
Slavery.
we fulfilled the nations from ocean to ocean, but we have what do we have going on? Yeah, we have sectional conflicts, debate all over what issue?
Slavery.
Exactly, slavery. It's gonna, and it's eventually gonna roll up today, actually turn into a little violence. We're not gonna fight a war yet, but we will have some uprisings. We'll kill about 200 people.
That's not a lot.
Big number, but not for war. As you can see on this map, here's the free states in this blue color. In California, I don't know why this is blue, but it's not a blue state yet. The orange is slave states, so you can see how it's divided up. This will be considered the Mason-Dixon line. Right here. This will all be the Mason-Dixon line.
Virginia switch.
Well, they actually are a slave state, but they're kind of late to join late to succeed. Okay, as you can see, violence we will start today. Uncle Tom's Cabin, a book by Harriet Beecher Stowe, was published in 1852. It portrayed a slave's life on a southern plantation. But it was also very controversial because it kind of put a human element to the slave before they kind of stood back and looked down upon a slave. But when she wrote from a human point of view, humanizes the slave. The Northerners have sympathy with the slaves, so it's great support among the Northerners. But in the South, they actually try to ban the book to keep from spreading this word. Because if you get people thinking that a slave is human, which they are, but if they're thinking that way, then they're going to have a hard time with the violence and forced slavery. It's widely speculated that when Lincoln first met Harriet Beecher Stowe, he said, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that made this great war." That's how impactful that book was among the North. And Tom, Uncle Tom, that's the main character. He's the slave. Like I said, he was depicted as human. Got a human element to it. And then the antagonist in the book is the overseer. And he is portrayed as a villain. So you can kind of see how we're setting this picture up. The Fugitive Slave Act was a part of the Compromise of 1850, which we learned about yesterday. It required all escaped slaves to be returned to their southern owners. The accused were not allowed to testify. And if they had escaped to the north, the Northerners, just private citizens, they had to return the slaves. If they knew they were escaped, they had to return them by law. And all it took was to identify a slave as a runaway was one witness to say they were runaway. That's all it took. This also fueled Northern outrage against slavery because it was enlisting a private citizen to do the Southerners, plantation owners work for them. And also it was kind of a money issue as well because the federal commissioner received $10 if he sent the slave to the South, but only $5 if you did not. So you can see how the more slaves you send, the more money you get. And there it says any person who refused to help in the capture would be jailed. The Fugitive Slave Act actually backfired on Southern slaveholders with Northern resistance, which the requirement for ordinary citizens to help drove many Northerners into active defiance. Northern resistance became frequent and sometimes violent. We'll get into the more violent in a minute. They believed that violence was justified because of the violent nature of slavery. So that's how they kind of justified their acts of violence. Frederick Douglass, one of the great anti-slavery activists, said the true remedy for the fugitive slave law was a good revolver, a steady hand, and a determination to shoot down any man attempting to kidnap. So he saw sending a runaway slave back to the south as being kidnapped. And you can also see in that quote justifying the violence due to the violent nature of slavery. The Underground Railroad. This was also kind of a part of runaway slaves and defiance. It was an informal but well-organized system that helped thousands of slaves escape. We'll look more at the Underground Railroad when we do our DBQ. You can come to your own conclusion if it was organized or not, if it was helpful or not. Members called conductors transported runaways to the north and gave them food and shelter along the way. Harriet Tubman was one of the famous conductors. She actually risked her life several times making trips back down to the south to lead runaway slaves into the south and into the north. Many Quakers also worked on the Underground Railroad. Do y'all know what's so special about Quakers? Like, what's their key? They are on the oatmeal box. But what's one of their key points, their key beliefs? Right, they're pacifists. So they are very pro Underground Railroad. Here's just a map of the Underground Railroad. You know a lot of them originate right now in the Mississippi River. That's because they use search dogs to track down runaway slaves. If you stayed in the water or along the water, you could help kind of disguise your scent to the dogs. And also we have a lot going up here towards Pennsylvania and New Jersey. But this was a big one right here along the Mississippi River. The Transcontinental Railroad. This is an actual railroad, unlike the Underground Railroad. With Oregon and California open for the rest, with Oregon and California open, the need for transportation grew. Americans became convinced that they needed to connect the West Coast with the rest of the country. So they devised this plan. The Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroad eventually connected at Promontory Point, Utah, to complete the Transcontinental Railroad. Before we can connect them, though, we have to agree on where we're going to connect them. We know where they're going to, but they don't yet. Southerners wanted a southern route. Northerners want a northern route. Southerners want theirs to originate in New Orleans. Then we'll get to Senator Stephen Douglas. He wants it to originate in Chicago, because he's from Illinois. We also have some that want it to originate in the Midwest. The Gadsden Purchase included land in the southern part of Arizona and New Mexico, in case the railroad went that route. Just in case we bought it. We paid Santa Ana and Mexico $10 million for this strip of land. It's about Tucson, Arizona, and the surrounding areas. That's about where it's located. Just in case we want to put the railroad. The railroad went north. Territories west of Missouri would need to be organized. So if you have to organize these territories west of Missouri, what question does that bring into play? Same question with the other territories out there. What's the debate?
Slaves.
Exactly. Is it going to be a slave state or a free state, or going to admit one each? How are we going to organize these territories? Southern senators controlled key committees and wanted the Missouri Compromise repealed. Kansas-Nebraska Act. Stephen Douglas proposed undoing the Missouri Compromise and allowing slavery in the region, in the Kansas-Nebraska region. This region would be divided into two territories, obviously Nebraska and Kansas. Kansas became the battleground when both slave and free citizens moved into the territory. Like I said, Stephen Douglas was a Democrat from Illinois and wanted the origin of the Transcontinental Railroad in Chicago. This required Congress to organize the territories west of the Missouri, so he prepared a bill, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, to do so. But Southerners, who also wanted the eastern point of the Transcontinental Railroad to be in the south, they told Douglas if he wanted for Nebraska organized, he would have to repeal the Missouri Compromise allowing slavery in the territory. And this kind of set up Nebraska being the free state, Kansas being the slave. Yeah, Nebraska was intended to be the free state, Kansas the slave state. Bleeding Kansas. This is going to be the scene of fighting between pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces. But before we can actually fight, we need to know a little bit about Kansas. Kansas offered the same soil and climate as the slave state Missouri, so people started moving there with slaves. But once the pro-slavery people started moving there, Northerners or anti-slavery citizens, they also rushed into the state. That's how we're going to end up with two different governments, one pro-slavery and one anti-slavery. Each side issued a call to arms, and eventually on May 21st, 1856, pro-slavery forces attacked the town of Lawrence, a stronghold of anti-slavery settlers. They wrecked newspaper presses, shops, homes. They also burned a hotel, and they also burned the home of the Free State governor. That is when the newspaper titled or dubbed as Bleeding Kansas. Over 200 people died, and more than $2 million in property was destroyed. While we were actually fighting in Kansas, we were also fighting on the Senate floor in Washington. Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner delivered a speech against pro-slavery forces. So he's anti-slavery, delivering a speech against pro-slavery forces, singling out Andrew Butler of South Carolina. Well, Butler's cousin, Representative Preston Brooks, did not like this, so he confronted Sumner on the floor of the Senate and beat him with a gold-handled hammer, leaving the senator bleeding on the floor. Southerners actually considered Brooks a hero, and they sent him canes with the inscription, "Hit him again." Okay, here's where I want y'all to pair the partners just right beside you, turn around. I think we have an odd number here, so maybe one group's gonna have to be 3. These are the 2 things I want you to discuss. First, they're on page 320 and 326. The first one is explain how the government dealt with slavery in the territories acquired after the war with Mexico.
Are we doing this on this?
No, we're just
We right?
No, we're just discussing it. Then y'all are going to discuss it in y'all's little group, and then we're going to come back and discuss it as a whole. We also, look, there's 3 different things. We also want to list the major features of the Compromise of 1850. And then on page 326, we want to identify how both the Fugitive Slave Act and the Transcontinental Railroad heightened sectional convenience. This point right here, the Compromise of 1850. How did it deal with slavery in the new territories? Exactly, it eased the tensions for a little while. Anybody else have a point they want to add to this first one? Jackson.
What's your idea, Jackson?
The first one.
Oh, wait. Will my district or whatever it is propose that any territory in the U.S. came from Mexico, either slavery or involuntary servitude,
Exactly.
shall ever exist.
Exactly. So, like I said, going back, we're arguing over are we going to be free state or slave state? So, if we got her point, which was free state, where's the slave state? Where's their point of view? Anybody get? Well, we got the Wilmot from Mizio, so what's the other? What's the opposite? Remember, he was from the north, so the southerner kind of gave a rebuttal. What was it from? Also the exactly, popular sovereignty. Anybody on the right side of the ring want to tell me what popular sovereignty is? Levi?
The own state has a choice of decipers.
Exactly, their own state got to decide. So there's a couple ways we dealt with this issue. Like I said, it wasn't very cleanly, wasn't very smooth. Kind of rough around the edges. And then we eventually get to the compromise of 1850. Kind of eased tensions, but not really. Does anyone want to list the major features of the compromise? Y'all here. I'm sure because you're the first one to tell the chart.
Read all of them.
Just read me a couple.
California amended to the Union as free state. Texas border dispute with New Mexico resolved. Texas received 10 million.
Okay. The big one was California was admitted as a free state. That was the big one. Then also the Texas dispute is resolved. Anybody else have key point maybe that was not on the chart? Or another one that was on the chart? What did you do there? I know what you did. It was abolished in DC. Anybody want to go a little further? Maybe why did Southerners or pro-slavery people, why did they agree to abolish the slave trade? What did I tell you about the difference in
They
slavery?
can make their own.
Right. Slaves were not worked near as hard in North America as they were in South America, so they were allowed to reproduce. What about the third one? Identify how both the Fugitive Slave Act and the Transcontinental Railroad heightened sectional tensions.
Train track, they needed to know where to place it.
Exactly, they argued over where to make the eastern starting point. Was it going to be in the north or the south? Each side was fighting for their own cause. What about the Fugitive Slave Act? How did that make people angry?
All slaves had to return to
Exactly, and slaves had to return. Who had to return them though? Who had to turn them in? Yeah, private citizens in the north, and that really angered them, that they had to get involved. Anybody else have a point?
Thank you.
Anybody else have a? Well, if that's all y'all have today, then go ahead and write your summary paragraph. Guys, I'm passing around 2 worksheets for y'all to work independently on. One talks about economics and slavery, like how was slavery profitable or was it not, how the South, why they liked it, why they didn't, what the money they made off of it, and there's some graphs and some questions. So y'all can answer these on your own paper. About primary source, it talks about the gold rush, people going to California for gold, and there's some questions. It's very short. 4 questions. Also, you can answer it on your own paper. You can do it on the same sheet of paper with the other worksheets. But we got about 30 minutes, so. Okay, the economics and slavery one. Number 1, how do economics define the labor force? Exactly. Able and willing. What is able? Right. Was the increased demand for cotton larger from 1841 to 51 or from 51 to 60? And how much more was it?
51 to 60.
Exactly. It was from 160 and 41 to 51 to 190 and 51 to 60. So a difference of 30. What is the marginal revenue of labor? Marginal revenue of labor. Exactly. In economics, you'll learn this in 12th grade. Marginal simply just means addition. I think I mentioned it in here as well. Skipping number 5, since this doesn't pertain to this class. Number 6, today's mass-produced items, such as clothing, are only made in sweatshops. Sweatshops workers are paid very low wages. They work long hours with bad working conditions. Often have no power to change those conditions. Explain the similarities and difference between workers in sweatshops and enslaved labor. Travis?
In slave labor, you didn't get paid at all, and when you're in a sweatshop, you didn't get paid, but you still work labor, so.
So at least in the sweatshop, they're being paid something. Slaves got nothing. But what did slaves get? Although it wasn't great, but what did they get in the sweatshop? They got meals
Place to live.
and then a place to live. Any other differences? What about some similarities? Exactly, the work is very hard, very dangerous. Anything else? Okay, let's move on to the gold rush where we're reading from Mr. Shaw. He actually wrote this during the time. What does Shaw believe is the illness cure for gold fever? Exactly. Changing climate. What he's talking about. California fever 49 with raising of all its fury, and the only remedy seems to be to change the climate with the least possible delay. So he was talking about going east from Boston to California as quickly as possible. Why were many people willing to risk traveling overland to California? You don't even have to read this to know why people. Exactly, new land, new life, gold, which is money, expansion, exactly, several reasons. How many ships made it to San Francisco in the first year of the gold rush? Exactly, 500. What in this reading shows that people going to California to find gold often were not prepared? Let's just think outside of this reading. We know they were not prepared. How were they prepared? Yes, exactly. I mean, it was a very dangerous journey. Can anyone just think outside of this document why they were not prepared? Exactly. The climate was very harsh, and they weren't prepared for that. What else did they experience along this trail? We learned about this before. Animal use, they ran into those. And what else about Native Americans? Well, granted, most of them were friendly, but they were fearful of them because they didn't know what to expect. Anybody else have an idea of why this was a dangerous journey? How about just the sheer length of time that it took for them to travel overland in a wagon? And the lack of food. Hold on, I have one more activity and we're finished. Yep, and we got 4 minutes. And we have one question. Nope, you can write on this paper. At the end of the day, yeah. Just put it on a desk and leave. This is very short, very easy. One question. Yes, it allows you to get out of the classroom.